All right, how's it going? Hope you guys are doing well. So here's a question for you. Have you ever realized how recently it feels like more and more devices are managing to cram all their power, all their performance into these tiny little form factors, and they're not really having too many negatives? So in front of us, we have Apple's latest M2 chip in the Mac Mini, which is this aluminum frame. It's small, and at the same time, it pulls less power than machines 10 times its size, and it still manages to be scorching fast. So power efficiency has always been a main focus in technology. Every new phone is trying to push and extend battery life further, but it feels like even though graphics cards have been getting more efficient, frames per watt are going up, but the power draw, the total power draw, has also been increasing. So we have these giant 450 watt behemoths that need these beefy coolers. Because while power efficiency is admittedly an engineering feat to marvel at, like having this much power in the palm of your hand is awesome, ultimately what's gonna sell graphics cards is performance. So something I contemplated for a new build was, am I just gonna shove a 4090 in this giant case where the majority of the space is gonna be wasted, or maybe have a little fun and try to cram it into a case the size of a shoebox? So it started with the idea of what a tiny 4090 build would look like. Would this be even possible without creating a thermal bomb? And would it even be worth doing something like this? Okay, so here's a target goal going into this. It's gonna have to be built in an ITX frame that can support one of the largest 4090 3-slot air-cooled cards, and it's gonna have to do it while maintaining thermals and performance in the form factor. Now, after a bit of research, I'm pretty sure we found a home that might just work with this. This is the NR200P Max, and it's actually so much more than just a case. It's gonna make our lives much easier, because other than just being a metal box, it's actually a kit, so we end up solving 3 parts with 1 purchase. And here's the funny thing I noticed about this. This case originally retailed for $350. And for a power supply, liquid cooler, and case, it seems like a solid value. But now, with everything rising and eggs being basically gold, it's $460 now. That's a tough one, but the case is done. Next, we have the challenge of platform choice to build this on. I'm coming from an 8700K that I've loved dearly and has been performing at that high level for long enough, but it's about time to hang up the cleats and retire, bro. So I've got the choice between going AMD or Intel right now. Now let's be real for a second. I could try to have taken a top tier baller CPU in this system, but I'm honestly just not really gonna use that extra power. It's kind of like buying a Bugatti for the daily 5-minute drive to the office. It's cool, but if I can't take advantage of the extra performance without getting arrested for speeding all the time, it's fine to go with the more economic option. So it was a toss up between the 5800 X3D and the 13600K. But I ended up getting a bit more bang for buck with Intel, surprisingly, especially with multi-threaded production workloads. Having the extra cores is nice. You know, you could upgrade constantly, but I feel like until there's enough of a jump in performance, small percentage increases are not really gonna make a change in my productivity. I game primarily at higher resolutions, and any productivity work I use the system for is basically GPU accelerated. So going with an i5 13600K, throwing in a couple sticks of RAM, that's pretty much all I need, which is pretty great. Although I did have to pick up a new mini ITX board from Asus and some additional SK Hynix Platinum, so it's gonna make data ingestion much less of a concern. And this board actually utilizes space pretty well, has a second M.2 slot on the back. So far, there hasn't been any real hiccups building this. The case has been super flexible to build in, and you can tell they really focused on maximizing space here. I feel like the engineers that designed this case must have like really organized closets, like not an ounce of space gets wasted in there. I've been so accustomed to building with larger ATX builds recently that it was almost comically easy to build this. I finished wiring it all together, installed the included PCIe Gen 4 riser cable, and I'm ready to install the GPU. So the process to building in this case isn't completely foreign to what I'm used to. The one thing is though, on paper, it claims to support a graphics card of up to 336 millimeters in length. The graphics card I'm using is 337 millimeters in length. So we're really pushing the limits. And with a little bit of time to line it all up and using a third-party flexible power adapter, it actually fits. But when I tell you that there's an absolute perfect fit, that's it. There is literally zero clearance for anything larger than this. The fact we were able to pull this off without any modifications was kind of lucky, and just because it fits doesn't mean it's not gonna be a hot mess in there, because we are pushing the limits of this case with a graphics card that it wasn't designed for. There is enough clearance between the side panel and the graphics card where I feel like the vented panel might be the better option for for airflow, which it absolutely is. I experimented with a couple of different airflow setups and found that, strangely enough, by adding 2 slim Noctua fans at the bottom, in the exhaust orientation, it managed to be the most optimized setup for thermals. So negative pressure with the top fans exhausting air and the bottom fans exhausting air actually performed best for both GPU and CPU thermals. This is really different to the common setup of using a glass panel and having a single direction of airflow through the case. All right, so everything's been assembled. We've tested the airflow setup. I think it's time to actually benchmark the system fully and see how it performs. So all the testing here was done on titles with the settings cranked to the absolute max without DLSS enabled, and the performance has been fantastic. Obviously, tweaking the settings on a per game basis are gonna drastically increase the FPS, but I wanted to sweat the system with a few games that are pretty rough to push. I also undervolted the CPU, so we're using less wattage and retaining higher boost clocks without driving up the temps. But yeah, surprisingly, no insane temps. Everything is staying very manageable and the system is pretty quiet. Since we're using a pre-installed 850 watt power supply in here, and the 4090 ships with a little overkill power targets by default, does not necessarily mean that they are efficient or optimized for this build. So I found that reducing the power target here to the mid 300 watt range, you still retain a high percentage of performance while drastically reducing thermals and noise. And the whole looks of the case are pretty sweet, but not as impressive as what's crammed inside. I don't have any crazy custom water cooling in there right now, so it's just literally an easy mode build. Okay, now you've got one of the largest GPUs out there in a pretty small case. So what have the benefits been of a build like this? I think first off, you have to mention, not everyone's gonna like this. You kind of have to be into tinkering with your hardware and into the challenge of having full control of how you're actually building your system. I feel like we're in such a good position right now in the PC building space where there's so many resources and options for you out there for you to take on a goal or a challenge for a build you want. You can always make adjustments for whether you're dealing with a thermal capability issue. You do your research and eventually solve the problems and challenges where once you finish with the PC you wanted to build, you feel fulfilled and the experience was probably positive. I'm absolutely loving this build. It's gonna be my everyday system for now. Now there are negatives to all of this, like the limited space for parts to actually fit, the higher expense of using non-ATX parts, and having to combat with thermals in such a small package. But weirdly enough, I feel like after finishing this build, I would actually probably recommend a case like this as a great place for beginners and builders that don't want to deal with the hassle of a complicated build. Okay, overall, I think the Space Gray is wicked clean. It's delivering insane performance in a whisper quiet package without much compromise. So I'm actually interested to see if you guys would be interested in maybe checking out mini ITX PCs in the future. Maybe you own one right now, and maybe we'll tackle some similar builds or topics like this if you guys are into it. So I'm happy I did this. It's been a blast. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.